There's a psalm pastors refused to preach for 40 years. A psalm Kathryn Kuhlman mentioned only once, before she died. And when you discover which one it is, you'll understand why they tried to hide it from you. Because it's not just any biblical text. It's a prayer that changes everything. A prayer that breaks all the rules you've been taught about how to speak with God. Imagine discovering a secret door in your own house. A door that's always been there, but nobody ever told you existed. That's precisely what you're about to discover. The year was 1976. Kathryn Kuhlman was on stage at the Shrine Auditorium in Los Angeles. Thousands of people, waiting for a miracle. And then she did something she'd never done before. Something that left her in tears. She began reciting a psalm, but not just any psalm. This particular psalm. And when she finished, the silence in the auditorium was deafening, because everyone there knew they'd just heard something forbidden. But why forbidden? Why would a text from the Bible itself be considered too dangerous to be taught? The answer will shock you, because this psalm breaks traditional theology. It teaches you to pray in a way religious leaders have always said was impossible, a way that puts the power directly in your hands. And they knew that if people discovered this, everything would change. Think with me. How many times have you heard that you need to humble yourself before God? How many times have you been told that you're not worthy, that you need to beg, plead, lower yourself to be heard? This psalm teaches the exact opposite, and that's why it was banned. But before revealing which psalm it is, you need to understand how we got here. How such a powerful prayer was systematically removed from Christian pulpits. It all began in the late 1930s. The world was changing. War was looming. And inside churches, a silent battle was taking place. A battle over power, over who can speak to God and how. Imagine a closed room. Denominational leaders from across the country gathered in secret. The topic? Which biblical texts were safe to preach, and which were too dangerous, because they had realized something terrible. When certain passages were taught, people stopped depending on pastors, stopped needing intermediaries, began having direct experiences with the divine, and that couldn't continue. It was at this meeting that this psalm was marked, classified as problematic for ecclesiastical order, silently removed from Bible studies, ignored in sermons. For 40 years, entire generations of Christians grew up without knowing it existed. But some knew, and they kept the secret. Kathryn Kuhlman was one of them. She knew this psalm contained a truth that would change lives, a way of praying so direct, so powerful, that results arrived in impossible ways. But she also knew the price of revealing this publicly, and she paid that price. Because 3 months after that service in Los Angeles, when she recited the forbidden psalm, Kathryn Kuhlman was dead. Coincidence? Maybe. But the people close to her knew something had changed that night, that a line had been crossed, and now you're about to cross the same line. But first, you need to understand what this psalm really teaches, and why it's so dangerous to the traditional religious system. You know, when you were a child, and you believed you could talk to God as if he were your best friend, without formalities, without rituals, without fear. This psalm teaches you that you were right. It breaks down all the artificial barriers they placed between you and the divine, all the rules they told you were necessary, all the intermediaries they insisted were mandatory, and it reveals a simple, devastating truth. You've always had direct access. Imagine the impact of this. If people knew they could speak to God without going through a pastor, priest, or any religious authority, what would happen to the entire system? That's exactly why it was banned. But here's what they didn't expect. This psalm didn't disappear completely. It was preserved in secret circles, passed from person to person for 4 decades, and the results were extraordinary. People experiencing miracles they had never witnessed before. Prayers being answered in ways that defied all logic. Healings happening without the laying on of hands, without elaborate rituals, just through this way of prayer that the psalm teaches, a way you're about to learn. But first, let me tell you about Sarah. Sarah was a mother of 3 in Detroit, a devout Christian for 20 years. She attended church religiously, participated in all the Bible studies, did everything they told her to do, and her life was falling apart. Her husband had lost his job. Her oldest son was involved with drugs. The house was about to be foreclosed. Sarah prayed every day, following exactly the instructions she had learned in church, humiliating herself, diminishing herself, begging for mercy. Nothing happened. It was then that an elderly neighbor, seeing Sarah's despair, made a risky decision. She decided to share a secret she'd kept for 40 years. She told her about the banned psalm, and she taught Sarah to pray in a completely different way. Sarah was shocked. "But that's not how I was taught," she protested. "That seems too audacious." The neighbor smiled. "That's exactly what they wanted you to think." That night, Sarah experienced this new way of prayer, and something extraordinary happened. It wasn't a voice from heaven. It wasn't a dramatic vision. It was something much more powerful. She felt, for the first time in 20 years, that she was really being heard. And in the next 30 days, everything in Sarah's life changed. Her husband received an unexpected job offer. Her son spontaneously abandoned drugs. The mortgage was renegotiated in a way that seemed impossible. Sarah knew something had changed in the way she connected with the divine. And you can experience the same transformation. But first, you need to understand why this psalm is so different from anything you've ever heard. Most of the prayers you've been taught follow a pattern. First, you humble yourself. Then you acknowledge your unworthiness. Then you present your petition timidly. And you end by hoping that maybe, if you're worthy, something will happen. This psalm completely reverses this formula. It begins with a declaration of authority, continues with a direct demand, and ends with absolute expectation of results. Does it seem radical? It's because it is, and it works in a way that will leave you speechless. But let me be very clear. This isn't a trick. It's not spiritual manipulation. It's not some magic formula. It's simply how communication with God was always meant to work. Before religious institutions built barriers, before leaders positioned themselves as necessary intermediaries, before you were convinced you were too small, too unworthy, too limited, this psalm reminds you of who you truly are. And that's precisely what terrifies the traditional religious system. Because if you know who you truly are, if you understand your true position in creation, if you grasp your direct access to the divine, you no longer need their system. And they know it. That's why when Kathryn Kuhlman recited this psalm that night in 1976, she knew she was crossing a line. She knew she was revealing something that was meant to stay hidden. But she also knew the time had come. The time for people to discover the truth. And now, it's your time. But before I reveal which psalm it is, you need to be prepared for what will happen when you start using it. Because your life will change. Not gradually, not subtly. Dramatically, people around you will notice something different. Your way of praying will transform. Your spiritual confidence will grow. Your results will multiply. And some people won't like it, especially those who profit from your feeling of spiritual dependence. Are you prepared for this change? Are you ready to discover that your whole life, you've had more power than you ever imagined? Are you ready to understand why they tried to hide this from you? Then let's dive in. The psalm that was banned for 40 years is more than just words on a page. It's a key that unlocks dimensions of possibility you didn't even know existed. It's a form of prayer that connects you directly to the source of all creation. No intermediaries, no complex rituals, no religious protocols. It's the prayer David used when facing giants, It's the prayer Moses used when he needed to move mountains. It's the prayer Jesus taught his disciples in secret. And it's the prayer you're about to learn. But here's something crucial you need to understand. This isn't just a more efficient prayer technique. It's a complete paradigm shift about who you are and what your place in the universe is. It's a revelation about your true spiritual identity. And when that revelation happens, nothing will ever be the same. Are you ready to discover who you really are? Because once you know, once you experience the power of this way of praying, once you witness the impossible results it produces, there's no going back. The secret door will be open forever. And on the other side of that door, a version of you that you never imagined could exist will be waiting. A version that knows how to pray with authority, that understands its direct access to the divine, that doesn't accept no as a final answer. A version that scares the traditional religious system. Because this version of you doesn't need permission to speak to God, doesn't need approval to have faith, doesn't need intermediaries to experience the supernatural. And that changes everything. Now listen closely. What I'm about to reveal is something few people in the world know. The banned psalm isn't just an ancient text with powerful words. It's a code that unlocks a specific form of consciousness, a spiritual frequency that most people never experience. And when you learn to access this frequency, miracles stop being exceptions and start being normal experiences. But here's what nobody ever told you about miracles. They don't happen to you. They happen through you. And this psalm teaches you the difference. A difference that completely changes how you see yourself and your role in creation. You're not someone who needs to beg for miracles. You're someone through whom miracles flow naturally. When you understand this, when you truly grasp this truth, the entire world opens up before you. And that's exactly what they didn't want you to discover. Now is the time to reveal what has been hidden for 40 years. The banned psalm is Psalm 82. I have said ye are gods, and all of you are children of the Most High. Stop for a moment. Read that again. Let the words sink in deeply. Ye are gods. Not, you can become gods. Not, maybe you are gods. Not, if you are worthy, you will be gods. Ye are gods. Present, definitive, absolute. And these aren't the words of a delusional mystic. These are words attributed to God himself in the sacred text, the creator of the universe declaring something about you that no religious institution wants you to know. Do you understand now why it was banned? Because if you truly believe this, if you truly live as if this were true, if you truly pray from this identity, the entire system of spiritual control collapses instantaneously. This single phrase destroys the entire system of religious control, the entire concept that you are small, limited, dependent. Because if you are a child of the Most High, if you carry the divine nature within you, if you have inherent spiritual authority, why would you need someone to intercede for you? Why would you humble yourself as if you were unworthy? Why would you accept no as a final answer? Why would you pay tithes to access God when you already have direct access? Why would you follow rules created by men when you have a direct connection to the source of all truth? Why would you live in fear of judgment when you are an heir to the celestial court? Each question is a crack in the system, and when all the cracks come together, the entire system crumbles. And they know it. Kathryn Kuhlman knew it. And that night, in 1976, she decided it was time for people to know the truth. But she went beyond just quoting the psalm. She taught how to use it. And that's what I'm going to teach you now. The Psalm 82 way of praying doesn't begin with, if it be your will. It doesn't end with, thy will be done. It begins with a declaration of identity. I am a child of the Most High. Not, I would like to be. Not, maybe I am. Not, help me to become. I am. And that declaration changes everything. Because when you pray from this identity, you're not begging like a pauper. You're declaring like an heir. You're not begging for scraps. You're claiming your inheritance. And the universe responds accordingly. Let me tell you about Mark. Mark was a pastor for 15 years. Dedicated, sincere, following every rule he'd learned in seminary. But his church was dying. 20 people on Sunday mornings, bills piling up, dreams crumbling. What hurt most was the feeling of spiritual failure. Mark wondered if he was doing something wrong, if God was displeased with him, if his faith wasn't enough. He'd tried everything the church growth books recommended: marketing campaigns, special events, programs for the whole family. Nothing worked. And every Sunday, looking at those 20 lost souls in a sanctuary built for 300, Mark felt a piece of his soul die. He prayed every day for the church, long, humble prayers, full of supplications. God, if it be your will, help our church grow. Lord, I know I don't deserve it, but please, Father, I humble myself before you. I acknowledge my inability. Always the same formula, always the same result. Nothing. Then Mark discovered Psalm 82, and something inside him rebelled against everything he'd learned. The first time he read, "You are God's," Mark felt fear. Fear of reading something blasphemous. Fear of questioning 15 years of theological education. But there was something stronger than fear. There was a deep recognition, as if a forgotten part of his soul was being awakened. In his next prayer, instead of starting by humbling himself, he declared something he'd never dared before. I am a child of the Most High. As a son, I claim provision for this work. As an heir, I declare growth for this community. As a bearer of the divine nature, I command the doors to open. The words came forth with an authority Mark had never experienced. He was shocked by his own audacity. But something extraordinary happened. Peace. A peace he'd never experienced in 15 years of ministry. Not the peace of resignation, but the peace of absolute certainty. As if he was finally speaking the right language. As if he was finally using the authority he'd always had, but never knew he possessed. And in the next 3 months, everything changed. People started showing up, not through marketing or special events. They simply appeared. Financial provision arrived from unexpected sources. Doors opened. Opportunities arose. The church that was dying with 20 people grew to 200 in 6 months. Mark understood that he had discovered something revolutionary. It wasn't about getting God to do something for him. It was about aligning himself with who he really was and acting from that identity. And that's exactly what Psalm 82 teaches. You are not a human being having an occasional spiritual experience. You are a spiritual being having a temporary human experience. And when you pray from this truth, everything changes. But here's something crucial. This form of prayer comes with responsibility. Responsibility that most people are not prepared to accept. Because if you are a child of the Most High, if you carry divine nature, if you have spiritual authority, then your words have real creative power. Your declarations shape physical reality. Your decrees manifest in the material world. And that means you can no longer speak carelessly. You can no longer complain constantly, because your complaints become prophecies. You can no longer declare lack, because your words of scarcity create scarcity. You can no longer speak curses over yourself or others, because your words carry spiritual weight. Every word that comes from your mouth becomes a seed planted in reality, and you are responsible for the harvest. This is both liberating and terrifying. That's why the psalm was suppressed. Not only because it gives power to people, but because that power comes with absolute responsibility. You can no longer blame God for what doesn't happen in your life. If you have spiritual authority and don't use it, the responsibility is yours. You can no longer blame the devil for what goes wrong. If you have the power to resist and overcome negative forces, and choose not to use that power, the consequences are yours. You can no longer play the victim of circumstances. If you can decree changes and choose to passively accept negative situations, you are choosing those situations. Because if you have spiritual authority, then you are responsible for how you use that authority. And that responsibility scares more people than the lack of power. It's easier to live as a victim than as a responsible creator. It's more comfortable to blame external forces than to assume authority over your own life. It's less risky to humbly ask than to decree with authority. But for those courageous enough to accept both the power and the responsibility, life becomes an extraordinary adventure of conscious co-creation with the divine. Let me tell you about Emily. Emily was a nurse at a hospital in Chicago, a Christian for 30 years, but she had lost faith in miracles. She had seen too much suffering, too much pain, deaths that seemed unjust. If God is good and powerful, she thought, why does he allow so much suffering? Then Emily discovered the truth of Psalm 82 and understood something that completely changed her perspective. God doesn't allow suffering. God delegated authority to end suffering to people like her. The next time she entered the room of a terminally ill patient, instead of praying, God, if it be your will, heal this person, Emily prayed differently. As a daughter of the Most High, I declare life over this body. As a bearer of the divine nature, I command healing to manifest. As an heir of the kingdom, I decree complete restoration. And then she laid her hands on the patient and simply waited. What happened in the next few minutes challenged everything Emily knew about medicine. The patient, who had been in a coma for 3 weeks, opened their eyes. The monitors showing multiple organ failure began to indicate improvement. In 72 hours, the patient was discharged. The doctors called it an inexplicable miracle. Emily knew it was something more. It was a demonstration of spiritual authority being exercised correctly. And that was just the beginning. In the next 2 years, Emily witnessed more inexplicable healings than in her entire previous career. Not because God had changed his mind about healing people, but because Emily had discovered her true identity and authority and started acting on that revelation. But here's something that needs to be very clear. This isn't a formula you can use to manipulate outcomes. It's a truth about your identity, a truth that transforms how you relate to all of reality. When you truly understand you're a child of the Most High, you don't use that authority for selfish personal gain. You use it to bring the kingdom of heaven to earth, to end suffering, to bring healing, to restore what's broken, to set free what's bound. And when you act from this motivation, the entire universe conspires in your favor. But I'll warn you about something. When you start praying this way, things will happen quickly, and not everyone will understand. Some people will be uncomfortable with your newfound confidence. Some religious leaders will question your humility. Some will try to convince you you're being presumptuous. And you need to be prepared for that. Because the truth is, the traditional religious system benefits from people who feel small, limited, dependent. When you discover your true identity and authority, you become a threat to that system. Just like Kathryn Kuhlman became, just like Jesus became, just like everyone who's discovered this truth has become. But here's what they can't take from you. Once you experience praying from your true identity, once you witness the impossible results this kind of prayer produces, once you see the power that's always been dormant inside you awakened, you can never again pretend to be small. You can never again accept artificial limitations. You can never again settle for anything less than miracles. And that transformation is irreversible. That's why Psalm 82 was suppressed. Not because it doesn't work, but because it works too well. And transformed people are impossible to control. Now let me teach you exactly how to use this revelation. The prayer of Psalm 82 has 3 specific parts, and each part has a precise, scientific and spiritual purpose. First part, declaration of identity. I am a child of the Most High. I carry the divine nature. I have spiritual authority. This isn't positive affirmation. It's a recognition of spiritual reality. When you declare this, you're not trying to convince yourself of something. You're aligning your consciousness with a truth that already exists. Say it out loud. Feel the weight of the words. Let them reprogram your self-image. Don't think about it. Don't analyze it. Don't let your theological mind interfere. Simply declare it as fact. Second part, exercise of authority. As a child, I declare. As an heir, I command. As a carrier of the divine nature, I decree. Here you use verbs of authority, not verbs of supplication. No please, no if possible, no if it be your will. I declare, I command, I decree. Be specific, be clear, be direct. If you need healing, don't say, God, heal me if it be your will. Say, as a child of the Most High, I command all sickness to leave my body now. If you need financial provision, don't say, God, help me with money. Say, as an heir of the kingdom, I declare abundance and prosperity over my life. If you need restored relationships, don't say, God, fix my marriage. Say, as a carrier of the divine nature, I decree reconciliation and renewed love in this relationship. See the difference? It's a complete paradigm shift. Third part, expectation of manifestation. I expect and receive the full manifestation now. This is the part that seals the decree. It's not hope. It's expectation based on authority. Not, I hope it happens. Not maybe God will. Not, if it be the divine will. I receive now. And then you act as if you've already received. Because in the spiritual dimension, you have. The physical manifestation is just a matter of time. But here's the secret few understand. The time between the spiritual declaration and the physical manifestation is determined by your inner conviction. The more you truly believe in your identity as a child of the Most High, the faster things manifest. And the more you practice this form of prayer, the more your conviction grows. It's a powerful cycle that accelerates exponentially. But be warned, this isn't a technique you can use sporadically and expect consistent results. It's an identity transformation that needs to become your new, normal way of relating to the divine. Let me tell you one last story. In 1977, a year after Kathryn Kuhlman's death, a secret group gathered in a house in Portland. 12 people who had been present that night in Los Angeles. 12 people who had heard the band psalm recited, and all had experienced extraordinary transformations in their lives. Not subtle transformations. Transformations that defied everything they knew about how life works. One of these people was Dr. Robert Chen, a cardiologist who had witnessed impossible healings after he started praying using Psalm 82. Another was Margaret Thompson, a widow who had gone from extreme poverty to financial abundance in 8 months. There was also Pastor James Morrison, whose church grew from 50 to 2,000 members in 2 years, each with an impossible story, each knowing they had discovered something that was a game changer. They made a decision, even knowing the risks, even knowing they were defying 40 years of institutional suppression. They decided this truth couldn't die with Kathryn, but they also understood why it had been suppressed. Because when people discover they have direct spiritual authority, they stop depending on religious institutions to access the divine. When they discover they can pray with real power, they stop accepting no as the final answer. When they discover their true identity as children of the Most High, they stop living like spiritual beggars, and that threatens the entire established religious power system. They began teaching Psalm 82 in secret, house by house, person by person, always with the same rigorous protocol. First, they tested whether the person was ready for the responsibility that came with the power, always with the same warning. This truth can change your life completely, but it can also change you in ways you don't expect. Are you sure you want to know? Because they had learned that not everyone is ready to discover their own power. Not everyone wants the responsibility that comes with spiritual authority. Not everyone is willing to step outside the comfort zone of religious dependence. 10 years ago, hundreds learned. 20 years ago, thousands. And now, nearly 50 years later, you are discovering. Not by accident, not by coincidence, because your time has come. The time to discover who you truly are. The time to access the power that has always been within you. The time to begin praying as a child of the Most High. But remember what Kathryn Kuhlman said that night in 1976, before reciting the Forbidden Psalm? The truth you are about to hear is not for everyone. It's only for those courageous enough to accept both the power and the responsibility that comes with it. Are you courageous enough? Are you ready to discover that your entire life, you've been far more powerful than anyone ever told you? Are you ready for a way of praying that produces results that defy all logic? Are you ready to become a threat to every system that benefits from your feeling of limitation? Because if you use what you're about to learn, if you truly understand your identity as a child of the Most High, if you begin to pray from this revelation, your life will never be the same, and the world around you won't be either, because you will no longer just be someone who prays for miracles. You will be someone through whom miracles flow naturally. And that is the difference between living like a spiritual beggar and living as an heir to the kingdom. The choice is yours. The secret door is open. On the other side, a version of you who knows your true identity is waiting. A version that doesn't accept no as a final answer. A version that knows how to pray with authority. A version that frightens the traditional religious system, because this version of you knows the truth they tried to hide for 40 years. You are a child of the Most High, and as a child, you have authority. As an heir, you have rights. As a carrier of the divine nature, you have power. Use it wisely. Use it courageously. Use it responsibly. And prepare to witness impossibilities becoming normal realities in your life. Because that's exactly what happens when you pray, knowing who you truly are. And now you know. The question that remains is, what will you do with this revelation? The Forbidden Psalm is no longer forbidden to you. The secret door is no longer hidden. The power that has always been within you is no longer sleeping. It's awake. It's available. It's waiting to be used. The only question that matters now is, are you courageous enough to use it?